I was 13 years old. I had had kind of both a really weird childhood with lots of high strangeness already, but also extremely normal child and early teenage interests and dilemmas and neuroses and all the things that that's happening at that age. So the day before the near-death experience, I had broke my arm playing baseball, and so I was really bummed out about that. And I was actually talking with my mother before, just winding down the day before going to bed, and out of the clear blue sky, it was as if words were just chucked out of my mouth and into the back of my head. And the words were, "Are you going to die soon?" And they came with a certain weight that I definitely clocked. And my mother certainly clocked it too, which was unusual because I always found her to be sort of a very sturdy, kind of formidable type person. And so she kind of had to, first she said, "No, I'm not going to die." And then she said, "No, it's going to be, I'll be around for a while." It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Then I just went to bed, woke up the next morning with another fairly strange, in a very strange way. I basically almost jumped out of my body. I mean, no, jumped out of my bed, I should say, as if I was jumping into my body. And it was at the same moment that my parents were walking outside of my bedroom. And so I started basically shouting, I've got something I've got to tell you. And I was panting as if I was catching my breath. And once I got their attention, then I couldn't remember what it was I was supposed to tell them. And I was extremely frustrated by that. So they basically had to calm me down for a few minutes. Uh, so that was not a usual morning for me. That was not a usual way to wake up and get out of bed. And so, it was actually one of those good days of school, like second to the last day of the year. So you're not going to have homework. As a 13-year-old, that's a great thing. I went to an award ceremony, won a lot of awards. That was always fun. I came home, was watching a film with my mother. We were basically waiting to drop my sister off at her new job at the edge of town in a new movie theater. And so we did that, but as we were pulling out of the parking lot across sort of a divided highway, 2 lanes each way, uh, we ended up getting hit by a car, which, we couldn't have seen. It was sort of behind another one at the time that the decision was made to go, and then it sped up to like 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. And I was just turning my head to start a conversation. Ironically, we were going to the same hospital where we ended up. We were actually going to get a cast on my arm. I started a conversation, and as soon as I turned to the left, there was this big old Lincoln Continental or Town car, one of those big old wide and large cars, right outside the door. I mean, right outside my mother's driver's side door, and I the next moments were filled with a great many surprises for me. The first one was I was really quite nervous about death. From about age 6 on. I mean, it really like bothered me. I was quite scared of it. So I had always expected that if I were to face it, that I would freak out. That was my self-assessment. That was the first surprise. I didn't freak out at all. In fact, as if some deep wisdom center of consciousness just kind of came online and took over in a way. And so my first thought, of course, was more of the normal one, like, oh shit, like basically because I was sure, like, well, this is it. It was a good run while we had it. The next thought, it was as if I was being taken down into sort of in calmer and calmer strata of consciousness. The next thought was, I thought this one was going to go more than 13 years, and I thought this one, as if I've had more than this, or there will be more. It was more like I wasn't complaining. This was it, and it's like, huh, this was a 13-year-old, boy death. Okay, that's odd. In that sort of way. And the next thing was the next surprise. The next surprise was something I'd also read about and always, was skeptical of, which was people having their entire life flash before their eyes. I knew of that phenomenon, and I thought, well, that's fascinating, but how the hell could you cram all of that information into less than a second? And there it was, and in greater detail than I had actually read about or seen on TV shows. No one told me about in any of the things I was watching at the time in the 1990s. No one had mentioned 360-degree awareness or awareness of not just in one's own body, but in many bodies at the same time, or this kind of what I would later call the non-locality of consciousness. I didn't have that word at the time. That was different. And no one had quite mentioned anything that I'd seen that your memories are actually going to be better in that life review than they normally were. Everything was crisp, cleaned up, and experienced at the full. What I thought, how could you actually know it's the full range? But comparatively, it felt like a much fuller, fuller range of any given memory. The other thing that was interesting was it was as if I had a guide with me. Now, this guide could have been just a deeper aspect of my own consciousness, or the higher self, or God, or whatever words anyone wants to insert in there. Didn't really matter to me. I had experienced this quote unquote guide many times before in life. Usually, I tried to ignore its advice or push it away. But in this situation, I was completely embracing it and sort of melting into it. And so we kind of went through my life, not in sort of like a judgy kind of way, but definitely in a hyper objective sort of way, where everything was sort of looked at. So if there were places where I had sort of was bullshitting people because I was afraid, or where I was contracting in a similar sort of manner, those are seen and diagnosed and as if cleansed in this process. Now, thankfully, I'd never done really anything like terrible, so I have no idea how that would play out in a life review. But all of those errors were being clocked, and on the other hand, a lot of things that were maybe considered essential or the most essential to my life in terms of importance were also highlighted. Sort of the merit column was there, but the merit column wasn't necessarily what I would have expected it would have been. So for instance, a few of the things were simply me. One of them was, I still remember it very clearly, looking into a puddle on the playground at about third grade at recess. And it wasn't anything about just looking into the puddle. It was more where my consciousness was when I was doing that, which of course as a 9-year-old, I was not thinking I was going into some deep mystical state by letting myself just sort of look and get lost in these raindrops going into a puddle. But in that NDE review, it was like, right there, that space of consciousness, that's what we want more of. That's where it's at in this life. So a lot of those things were focused, as opposed to things that if I were making up my list of merits at the time, I would have thought, oh yeah, that time where I went after the bullies, or it's not like those were bad, but they just weren't the highlights according to this sort of objective consciousness guide that was taking me through my life. And the other thing that was interesting that I wasn't prepared for either was the fact that it was as if I was having a massive amount of weight taken off of me in this process. So it wasn't just sort of a disconnected sort of intellectual review of that thing of your life. It was completely immersive, and it was therapeutic, and so therapeutic in the sense that when we would look at when we would go through all the experiences where I was afraid, it was as if the effects of that tension were taken off. And I also realized that by the end of this thing, that I had been walking around, even with I'd say a fairly easy, non-traumatic, North American life. I had been walking around with a 50-pound sack of potatoes on my back of fear and anxiety. Even in that kind of context, I had no idea how much was being carried around until it was off, and it was as if I had like a thin film thin constricted film in a way, covering that was peeled off that I had been completely, at that point, mostly, maybe not completely, but mostly ignorant of. And so by the end of the process, almost back in sort of, real time, so I didn't really go anywhere. But back in that car, you know, milliseconds later, perhaps, not even hit by the next car yet. Back there, I was more alive than I had been probably in life. Maybe maybe I was as alive as a baby or a toddler in sort of my early years in spurts, but that was the most raw and vivid, and without separate self or egoic filter that I had ever quite experienced. Everything was saturated with light. There was, of course, I had no tunnels and no relatives or anything like that. It was, to me, it's like, it wasn't like I was having to go to some disconnected other side that you have to make a discrete journey to. It was rather more like, if I were a Christian type, which I wasn't raised that way, I would have said like, oh, the kingdom of heaven is here and now. Something like that. It was more of a realization that my entire life, in fact, everything had been made of love. And even that was the word in my 13-year-old, the phrase in my 13-year-old head. I wasn't quite yet mystic in life, but it was like, oh my God, it was love the whole time. Like that was the great reveal of the whole life. The clouds, the car, my mother's shoulder, my entire past, the the ugly side of a highway ditch. All of those things were just completely saturated with like loving presence, and there was no difference between me and it. It was essentially a seamless, organic whole with nothing stopping. It was beautiful. It was absolutely, and I wasn't thinking about it, but I could have easily had a thought somewhere in there, proto thought like, hell of a way to go out, real exclamation point on this thing, because basically at that point it's like microseconds away from this giant, you know, to our car we had a much smaller car, this giant vehicle, about to, well, and then it hit us, and got concussed very quickly. Uh, woke up. God knows how. I don't know when we came out, but when we came out, the guys with the big sort of tools were having to sort of dismantle, cut through the car doors to get us out. And we were both still alive at that time, and went into the ambulance. And my mother, in fact, I think I was maybe more touched by her courage, her strength, her love, because she was trying to stay around to make sure I was okay. And I didn't know that at the time because I didn't even know my name. The EMTs were asking me stuff. It's like, I have no idea. I know that's my mom. That's about all I know. That's all that was there. I was in a strapped down because they didn't know if I had, spinal issues yet. So I was kind of held down and flat, and this person was checking me and trying to talk to me. And my mom was on the other side, same ambulance. And she called my name out twice, tried to see if I was okay, and I responded to her. And then after the second one, I think she registered it because her breathing changed, and it's like she let go. And something, I mean, honestly, something just in her voice has stayed with me my entire life. And if I found myself in hard times or facing difficult decisions, I can still kind of hear that, and it galvanizes me to do the right thing, as it were, or to make the courageous move, or make the move that enlivens the soul. That's there. And so I, also in that ambulance scene, the whole thing of, being in more than one place at a time that some people talk about was there. I mean, I was partly in my body here with that sort of strapped down perspective. And the other part, I was up at the top of the ambulance. I could feel my mother up there too. It was interesting when she called out. It wasn't as if her voice was broadcast from some separate point having to cross air molecules and reach my physical ears. It was more like an instantaneous grokking, like I could feel it. And after her breathing changed, I felt from the perspective of the top of an ambulance like a weird whoosh, like as if there's no wind up there, not in a real body, but it felt like a kind of a whoosh. And I did not put two and two together in my concussed state that that was maybe my mom uh, moving away from the body in a way. And so time was like a blur, like it would be for anyone. And then I found out that she didn't make it when in the hospital. My dad had came out of the operating area behind the curtains and told my sister and I that your mother's gone. And so that was just like medicine ball in the gut of sadness and grief and everything else. The next, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 days were maybe a kind of a blur um, in a way. And it was, though, then it was not long after that that what I thought was just shock. I certainly was experiencing shock, but there was something more going on, and it was strange because I found after sort of I caught my feet again that I wasn't afraid of anything, which was really strange because I mean, I wasn't like hyper neurotic, but I was a teenager, with with all sorts of bad conditioning, and it wasn't there. And nor was there that really sort of heavy uh, editing, judging voice in the head, which had been such a feature for the last 6, 7 years. I mean, that self-consciousness was certainly there because I could respond to my name and really do all the things I could do. But the judgy part, the constrictive part, that was gone. That was I would try to go into it and I would start laughing. That's all that would happen is I would involuntarily laugh at the maneuver I was trying to do. The other thing that was there was this profound silence, like a silence that you could cut with a knife. I had known that in deeper childhood, but it hadn't been this pronounced as it was. So it was as if I was sort of walking through it, that palpable. With that silence, there was also a sense that, like, the top of my head wasn't there, and or the back of my heart wasn't there. It was like I could be in different parts of my body, and if I just relaxed a little bit, find myself going into this kind of formless dimension of life, this kind of big vastness. And when I would do that, so I started to experiment with it, like still thinking it was shock. I wasn't thinking these were mystical or anything like that. I was like, oh, this is great. When I would do that, I would have these flows of really like the most delightful, pleasurable sensations flowing up my legs, up my torso, out the top of my head, and then sometimes concentrating in my stomach. And it was just bliss was the only word I had in my vocabulary that could maybe come close to matching that. And so that was very interesting. At the same time that was going on, I was also going through the stages of grief. So I don't know what they are now, but the stages of loss, like certainly denial was there, anger was there. Did I get to acceptance? I'm not sure. But I mean, I was punching walls in my garage or hitting my garage walls in anger. And I didn't necessarily believe in any kind of deity at the time, or God. So I was like, if there is some kind of God, man, you really fucked up. Like why would you take such a good person? All that kind of stuff. So it was a very interesting 2 or 3 months in that respect, because for 2 or 3 months until the next school year started in late August, there was this other this other deeper dimension of life that just didn't go. Uh, and I was able to, I don't think a lot of people clocked it because I was, still kind of just being natural. And it's not like all my interests, had gone. And it's not like I didn't know how to, have conversations with people and all of that. I could still wear the mask of a personality, but I just wasn't lying about it. There just wasn't any kind of extra stuff. So I'm grateful I was given that period because I think a lot of the grief was also able to be efficiently felt of, but of when that fell away, that's when that was a rough time. Of Around the end of the summer, some upperclassmen, somebody up in high school, I was in middle school, who I knew, they felt like there was a change in me, and they thought it was for the positive, and they asked me like, hey, what's going on with you? And I was like, and they're like, how did you come by this? And I was like, well, what you got to do is just go get yourself in a car accident and don't die. And then we both laughed because that was just like stupid, sketchy, advice that no one should ever try to try to perform. And it was is when I was saying those words, actually, that same sort of deeper consciousness almost came up like a narrator and said like, yeah, soon you're gonna lose this. Didn't use the word state, but soon, yeah, I'll say state. Soon you're gonna lose this state, and because you're gonna have to, your purpose will be to find a way to get back to it in a much more repeatable and teachable manner. And I said, yeah, I guess that makes sense. That's fine with that. I wasn't fine when I did lose it. I was like, oh God, this is my eighth grade year of school. From the outside, it might have looked good to some people, but it was awful. I mean, it's just awful. I had to come to school like I'd be crying in the first hour of class because every day I would wake up thinking that I had succeeded in time traveling. So every night I would go to bed trying to sort of use my mental powers to time travel the day before my mom died and reverse everything. And so for about 40 seconds each morning, I thought I'd done it. And then the disappointment that no dice would just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that went on for a long time. So yeah, yeah. The
That's really heavy, and I feel the grief. So yeah, I think it's probably that you felt like you could have prevented it because you said something and you didn't and you forgot. You think it's that? You kind of
no, no, I mean no, yeah. That would have been really hard if I thought I could have done something, but I didn't see anything when we were pulling out. That it was just one of and she didn't, and she was a good driver. It's just one of those situations where it's just everything's lined up and it's bad. But what I would have wanted to do, yeah, I would have wanted to have caught that morning thing or done something else or just just delayed us a little bit. Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, creative ways. And I guess I had a fascination with time travel via consciousness at the times. I thought like I could figure it out. I can will this and so yeah. I basically just wanted to erase the last 8 months or whatever it would have been. 5, 6, 7, 8 months of life. And I would have been fine. Okay, trade this in. I'll go back to being 13 in June 5th, 1997. That yeah. Yeah, so that was hard. The mornings were hard.
yeah.
Of and so I went through a school year, I think kind of actually achieving a lot of the stuff at school and socially that I'd wanted for so long. But in some ways there are a lot of empty victories. And maybe that was good for me to really see like, oh, this stuff that I had wanted for all those years, it's so empty. It's so and I couldn't quite remember exactly what I had been. It's a weird thing. I mean, it was separated by a couple weeks. I couldn't quite remember all the uh, spaces of consciousness that I'd been experiencing. It was almost like getting thrown out of Shangri-La, and it didn't make bloody sense because I was still sleeping in the same bed, living in the same house, and in the same town. And so I remember about a year later, in the next summer, the summer before high school, I got to go into a metaphysical bookstore. And I had no interest in the local metaphysical bookstore because all I saw in the windows were sort of like, stained glass things hanging and, incense and stuff like that. And those weren't my interests. And so I went in there with my sister and I found myself in the back room where the books were. And I picked one up just to kill the time and kind of opened it at random. It was one of those things where it's just like I open to the right page and it's sketching out the different experiences of Himalayan yogis, and what they were talking about sounded exactly like what I could remember of what I had been experiencing the summer previous, and I was just hooked. You know, and because I had been actually trying to get back to that through maybe not great means, like jumping from heights. You know, not heights that I probably wouldn't kill myself, but which scared me. You know, so I thought fear was maybe the doorway to go through fears. I would jump out of moving vehicles. I would tell people what I thought was the most embarrassing stuff about myself because that scared me. So I thought like somehow if I can go walk through these fears that'll and sometimes it actually worked. If I would do that, I would peek into a kind of a transcendent state, but just very briefly and not very deeply. And then I ran out of embarrassing stuff, which which is a problem. And so yeah, it was great to go into this metaphysical bookstore and then start reading about meditation practices. And then the next problem was, okay, you know, I have to find some way to learn these things somehow. And slowly but surely, different mentors came into my town. Some of them were working as clairvoyants, sometimes at that metaphysical bookstore. And so over the next few years, I think I was half time sort of a a very imperfect teenager, as all teenagers tend to be, and neurotic and chasing things I don't need, and half the time sort of a serious spiritual seeker. Somehow those were sharing space in the same life, and so it got to be to the point where there was as if I could feel these yearnings deep inside that felt very true, but felt also very frightening. Frightening, not because they were scary, but frightening because I had the sense that if I opened myself up to these stirrings, it would dismantle the carefully laid plans of my life. I was yearning to go to the Himalayas, for instance, and I was thinking thought myself a coward. I was like, oh yeah, whatever. You're 15. You could just run away right now. Leave high school. Leave a polite note for everyone saying it's not you, it's me. I have to go. You know, and why aren't you doing that? I would get on my own case for what I considered a coward and a hypocrite, and not just taking the most intense extreme action that I could on what seemed true. I wasn't really sure it was true at the time, but uh, a few years down the road, age 17, something just a switch flipped, and I was like, okay, I need to do 6 hours a day of meditation. I'm going to do it. And they weren't necessarily the best, some of the best practices, whatever. But the commitment was there, and that brought a whole lot of magic uh, into life. I mean, I was doing a lot of like hard sort of zazen concentration meditations and cold showers at 3 in the morning, and all that kind of stuff. We waking up at 3 in the morning. That was crazy. But I thought I have to try and I have to go all the way. I don't think it's important for everyone to be that extreme, but throw a little astrology in here. I was definitely born with a lot of planets in Scorpio. So part of that is needing to go all the way and really commit deeply. And so I started to find my way back in little fits and spurts to that space that experienced in the NDE. I remember one time I was in a particularly dry period, and I was thinking I should quit because it sucked getting up at 3 in the morning and taking cold showers and doing all this stuff. And I think uh, had a very restrictive diet, all this stuff. I wasn't necessarily feeling a lot of bliss. So I remember one day I was sitting in an independent study class I'd arranged to have back in the teachers' lounge of the high school, and I basically said a prayer, like, oh God, just throw me a bone here, whoever's listening, because this is crazy that I'm doing this and I'm 18. Could I, and so I've just had that thought, not expecting anything would come of that, but as soon as I opened up my eyes and looked at my desk in front of me, it was bizarre and wonderful. I was in the desk. I was in my body, but I was also in the desk, looking back at myself at the same time in a non-confusing way. I was like, "What the?" And I looked at my pencil. Oh my God, I was in the pencil too. There was no difference between pencilness and I-ness. That we were the same I. I started looking around at any object I could see to see if the spell would be broken. It was not broken, then the hardest test would be a human being I know, because humans, we tend to agitate each other's conditioning very easily. And so like, okay, I could look at one of the most benign, benevolent humans I know, my honors English teacher. She was coming out of her office, and I turned my head and I was like, "The spell hasn't broken." I was in her as well. I was in myself and in Mrs. Spiegelhoff, and then the bell rang, and I basically ran. It was the end of the school day. I ran around the school like a madman, and every now and then I'd find somebody, one of my classmates, and I'd say like, "It's happened," like I thought I'd just got enlightened or something. I was really, it's like, I thought, oh, it's happened, all this work. And, it was great, but then it faded after 30 minutes, and it kind of went back into, a more normal for the time kind of neurotic sort of space. But yeah, they threw me a bone or some, presence or the universe or whatever you want to say, threw me a little bone there. And so, I stayed hungry. And I was then also offered my future first brother-in-law. That's a very convoluted way of introducing someone. Uh, I think it was him at the time who lent me Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. Somehow it wasn't at my local library, which had like a good selection, but and then just reading that book, just reading it. It's like I wasn't initiated to Kriya or anything, but just reading that book in my little school library in the morning before classes started, felt like I was having my chest opened up to this massive flow of love, and felt like my head was being opened up to this massive flow of bliss. I didn't learn Kriya, but somehow just reading that book transformed or informed the way I was doing my Zazen type practices. I became gentler, I became lighter, less self-recriminating, and then like I was starting to experience much more quickly the natural sort of cessation of thought and a natural sort of immersion into the whatever you want to call it, the ineffable, the vastness, all those words. That started coming in a little bit, quite a bit more with Yogananda's book. At the time, I'd been searching for monasteries to go to of any tradition. I didn't care as long as if they were ecumenical enough to allow a guy like me to be a contemplative, you know, and not force me to take any creeds I didn't want to take. I don't think that would have happened, but that's where my head was at. So I was getting all these brochures from different groups, and none of them quite felt right. Like none of them quite, I don't know, had the music. So I was kind of like, I got to find where I'm going to go. So I think I need to go to one of these places. Before going to college or university, I thought I should do it now. Before I get more stressed in this nervous system. Let's make a shot now. So I prayed to Babaji. That's just a feature in Yogananda's autobiography. He takes a chapter or two or more to talk about the deathless guru of the Kriya Yoga tradition. And apparently many other traditions. Maybe a semi-mythical character. If we're being skeptical about it, but Yogananda made a promise in the book. It said like anybody who I don't know, calls out to Babaji. I don't know the exact wording. He'll hear you. And I was like, I'm taking this shot. This is cheaper than a lottery ticket. I've got to know. And so I built myself into the sort of the deepest place. I waited till I was in the deepest part of meditation, thinking my receiving tower would be clear somehow like that. And then I asked Babaji for help. Basically pleading my case, saying, like, hey, look, I'm pretty serious as you can. If you are an omniscient being, I'm very serious about what I'm doing. Could you direct me to where I'm supposed to go? Because I don't think I've found my sadhana yet. I don't think I've found my practice. I was expecting that maybe Babaji would send me to one of the Kriya places, because Yogananda's book was an excellent advert for Kriya. Did not. Couple days of, in fact, I had a strange experience in that time in which it was like there was a frequency, put into my brain. And basically the message was, pay attention to this pitch. Next time you hear it, that'll be your, basically your clue. And I was like, okay, I don't know if you're Babaji or who the fuck you are. Okay, I've not been possessed, so that's good, so like a day or two later, I was coming home, and there was this invite to this class called the Ishayas Ascension meditation. I'd never heard of it. It was the one my future brother-in-law did, and I could tell that when they were meditating, sitting across from me, I could tell there was something going down that was good with what they were doing. He didn't even need to describe it to me. And so I just found myself saying yes without having to, you want to come to a class this weekend? Yes. It's like that frequency. And I was pretty skeptical when I arrived, I have to say, but that's always been my way. And I don't think anyone who's into spirituality should feel they have to disabuse themselves of their skepticism. And if anything, it's probably good to keep it around, and keep some feet on the ground and head in the clouds, in a way. And I learned these techniques, still skeptical, and within 45 seconds, in my case, of doing their first technique, I was back in the deepest space that I had experienced after the car accident, during and after the car accident. I was there, uh, and that persisted for the whole weekend, kind of going back and coming out, going back and coming out of that space. I was completely intrigued, and more I felt like I'd sort of found the music I'd been searching for even since childhood, in a way, that I hadn't quite known. I had found where I was supposed to be sent, uh, which is cool. Like actually, some months, maybe almost a year before, I was 17, hadn't started meditating like 6 hours a day yet. I had a really fun teenage life of being part mystic, part teen, in a way. And I'd also had the sense I was walking around in a Walmart, in the local Walmart, and I just had this intuition. I should ask the universe where I'm going to be a year from now, because I couldn't figure it out. I was looking at different colleges and getting ready to maybe do applications in the next year and whatever. None of them felt that. I couldn't feel any of them in here, which was strange for me. In my whole life, I'd always been strongly guided, rightly, I'd say, by this kind of golden thread. I had no golden thread with any of these schools. I just kind of felt like I was flying blind. And so I just asked the universe, hey, where am I going to be about a year from now? And then, to my great surprise, I had a whole picture that was sort of displayed in front of me in this Walmart, and with a weird game show host style narrator voice accompanying it. And I think maybe for the humor effect, but basically this narrator voice says, like, funny you should ask, kind of like that. You're going to be, about a year from now, you're going to be working in a mostly vegetarian cafe, working with a bunch of monks, many of whom wear all white clothing. You'll start out as the dishwasher and work your way up all the positions and eventually becoming the head chef. Just like that. And I saw this very detailed picture of the kitchen, and looking at a ticket window and seeing a wooden clad juice bar in the next room with wrought iron plant hangers hanging plants, and like a copper backing, a very beautiful copper backing on the wall. It's a very detailed picture, which was not unusual for me to have detailed images through life, but it seemed so improbable. It's I mean, it was very detailed, but I was like, it's like, that's also me, pissing on like really good, prophetic advice my whole life, maybe, or whatever, because I'm a skeptic. Like, yeah, not likely, but thank you, but not likely, So I just kept on going with my teenage life and forgot all about it until I found myself, not long after learning this ascension practice, I had been pestering anybody whose number I could get a hold of who seemed to have a monastic type situation. Like, I was really probably bugging people. I didn't care. And finally, I found there was one on the Oregon coast. And at the time, I'd sort of moved myself from the middle of the country to Seattle. And I was in between one on the Oregon coast and one up in BC in Canada. And I felt drawn to this place in Oregon. So I called them, had a little phone interview before an in-person interview to see if I was a good fit. And the last thing my interviewer said on the phone was, oh, by the way, we might have a job for you. We just bought a cafe. We probably could use a dishwasher. And then I remembered that thing from the Walmart, and I was like, okay, I didn't want to tell him like that's exactly, because I thought, oh, they'll think I'm lying, to try to, get my spot. So yeah, I did lie. by omission, not sharing that that seemed to be the case. Uh, and about I must have been like 6 months after that, I was by that point I had gone through the whole progression that the weird radio voice guy said, like dishwasher to every job, and then I apprenticed with a proper cordon bleu trained chef. And then when he left, at some point I also became the chef. And anyways, at some point I was watching when I was being in the apprentice period, I was looking out the ticket window and gosh darn, it was the same people with the same hair and faces and everything that I'd seen in that vision in Walmart. Anyways, it was just one of those things that's very satisfying to, experience that, like being on a bookend of a time window like that. What was important about being there was did turn out to be the path back to the near NDE without having to go through the trouble of an NDE or similar. Uh, in fact, it was extremely enjoyable. So I wasn't having to beat the hell out of myself with discipline practices, which actually can be very useful in some cases. So I'm not knocking that whole side of spiritual practice, but doing like an effortless practice where I didn't have to try to force my mind to be quiet, where I could use these almost like prayer mantras that had appreciation, gratitude, and love in them, and I could also do them with my eyes open. Was just like it was like a gentle melting into sort of deeper and deeper relaxed states. And I don't know if I'd exactly would have called myself like a type A, but pretty close. That, and I don't know if I fit a type A, wasn't like a huge control freak, but it's definitely somebody who would try to go out and get life, and be active towards it. This was a wonderful way for that all that to be channeled into basically being we're just going to be very, very active and zealous about learning to fundamentally relax this nervous system, and sort of erase some of these programs of conditioning. That was a revelation because like I was very aware as a kid, as a teenager even, uh, I'd say relatively of my bullshit. Like knew a lot of my conditioning, my reactive patterns, but it was frustrating because I couldn't do a damn thing about them. I tried all sorts of stuff, like affirmations, diet changes, other things. It was not working. And so what was interesting about that meditation practice was that I would like wake up sometimes and go through my day, and then something that should have pushed my button, that just maybe the day before had pushed my button, was gone, like not even a trace. And so that would happen repeatedly. That was I think my most reliable way of measuring that something here was going on beyond wonderful mystical experiences, immersive samadhis in meditation, was the fact that inexplicably long, seemingly intractable of fear reactive patterns would just somebody just took them out. And I realized that was or was taught really that was essentially due to the fact that samadhi, experiencing that deep, that the peace that passes all understanding, is like Christian mystics would call it, or experiencing that the now, as Tola popularized, has this wonderful effect of also taking the whole human mechanism, mind, body, spirit, psyche, however you want to break it up, and sort of relaxing the whole structure, and to such a degree that it allows for self-healing to happen, uh, that sleep just can't do. And so it's like, oh wow, how interesting. And so doing a practice like 2 to 4 hours a day really sped that along significantly, and pairing that with yoga. I remember one of the more poignant things with my mother, because as a kid I saw ghosts a lot. So I was and as like a 5 to 10, 9, 10 year old, especially 3 to 10, that was the heavy rotation of that. So when my mom died, I was very frustrated that I really wanted to contact her spirit. It's literally the only spirit I ever wanted to contact. And it seemed like that was not happening, for whatever reason. So I was really upset about that. I mean, I didn't want to bug my mom if she needed to go to more expansive places, and I didn't think she was ever an earthbound spirit. But she went. And so that desire was there really deeply. So fast forward a few years, I'm in a very deep meditation retreat where I'm meditating about 8 to 12 hours a day with the eyes closed for a 6 month period. A couple months into that, I remember going to the bathroom and washing my hands. I look up, and in a non-scary way, my mother's face is in mine. Not just like that. There's a biological resemblance, which there even I think was more of at that point, before all this mountain man scruff came in as thick. But it wasn't simply biological resemblance. It was like her face, sort of superimposed seamlessly into mine, and I basically felt like you did it, from her. In a sense, like this is what is as if I was being communicated, like this is what all the trouble was for, in a way, was to. And I'm not really like self-centered. Thinking that other God, but there was not that sort of that way, but there's a sense of like this is me also taking up my end of the bargain, and getting to an environment where we can really radically decondition the nervous system, and know this beautiful bliss, and this silence as a baseline state. Uh, so that was an extremely sort of poignant bookend moment at about age 20. So looking back, doesn't seem like a whole lot of time. At the time, 7 years felt like forever. If you're young, 13 to 20 is a big difference in real estate. Uh, that was I've had a couple other kind of encounters, as beautiful as that one, with I think that the maybe the immortal spirit of my mother of later of but how was it we put it before the before we sat down and started recording was what are the effects of an NDE that are ongoing. I mean, this has been a big chunk, certainly to galvanize me to go back to it. But uh, at the same time, to me, it's like I was consciously continuing the process in a less dangerous way that an NDE can, in ways that NDEs can really help people, is that they take us to that place that's unconditioned. At the deepest level. Not everyone's the same. Like some people even have hellish NDEs or whatever that other thing. So I know it's a heterogeneous kind of spectrum of experience, right? But the ones that are like mine, there is that sense of oneness and unity, and that kind of going back to the primordial, some kind of maybe a primordial consciousness in a way that even but without meditation that would pop up. It was as if it's like I'd made myself a little bit more accident prone. I like this old phrase that enlightenment is an accident, but spiritual practices make us accident prone. It's like we just we're carving more holes in the street so we can up our chances of falling into one. Basically, and an NDE is a great way to make one accident prone, and sort of. I remember learning about state-specific memory in psychology class as a teenager, and usually it's about drunks. Like now I remember where my keys are. you know, but I found that it seems to apply to samadhi and these other subtle states of consciousness as well. And in a sense, I've found that basically samadhi had been waiting under the surface of my life the entire time. When I started to consciously find it through a meditation path, I realized, oh my God, it wasn't just in the NDE. That was just like a wonderful, fierce, cutting through a lot of stuff at once. But I realized as a meditator that, oh no, it was there when I was 7. I was just not taught to know that that's what that was. It was there here. It was there here. I could remember all these moments where there was this, where I was tuned into this vast silent witness and just didn't understand that. Now, those moments were some of the best of my life, those periods, and that like, oh, I know why now. because without knowing it, I was letting go into something that we can all let go into. It's all there. I think the way we are sort of taught to handle our nervous systems, I think that's the aberration. Uh, I think we're just kind of stuck in some like a long-term habit loop where we're slowly but surely, if we keep going as a species, we're going to have larger numbers of people falling into samadhi and learning how to integrate it with doing whatever tasks that our sort of civilization demands.
Well, it's interesting that you say that you become accident prone because I often say to people that it's through trauma that people kind of awaken. And
Mm,
it's not necessary that you have to have trauma, but it's almost like expanding your safety zone. Whenever you're outside of your safety zone, you're open to new experiences. And as soon as you're open to it, that's when you start really living. That's why
mm,
people like to go on holiday to new places because
yes.
it's new and it's bringing new sensory input, and
Yeah.
meeting new people, however it works for people. And if you contract, you're just going to go back into that safety zone and you numb yourself out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know more about the Ishaya Ascension meditation. I've never heard of it until I saw about yours, and it sounds so amazing because I've been doing Kriya Yoga for the last
Mm,
few months now. I only found Kriya Yoga now. How is it different? And I
mm,
think that could be something so powerful, and that's what most people need
mm,
without
mm.
realizing it.
Oh yeah. Different spiritual technologies, if I use that as a term. Sometimes it sounds funny, spiritual technologies. Um, so yeah, whereas in Kriya Yoga, there's depending on what level or which lineage, there's a lot of up and down the spine. There's a lot of pranayama, breathing practices, holds, uh, stuff like that. The Ishayas Ascension, in a way, has a lot to do with I'll call it maybe its parent meditation practice. It has a lot to do with effortless mantra practice, like transcendental meditation is. And TM ain't the only effortless mantra practice. TM comes out of an older tradition in India where you had these swamis called the Dandi swamis doing effortless practices, and where this ascension differs from transcendental meditation is that TM is essentially Sanskrit bija mantra, seed mantra practice, and the ascension practice is done in the first language primarily. So these little prayer mantras. That's why I thought it was going to work because I went to this class and I was like had read Yogananda's little chapter on the perfection of the Sanskrit language, or his footnote actually, and just that had made me a Sanskrit chauvinist. And I was doing some chanting in my room with and and so yeah, it's like these prayer mantras that include appreciation, gratitude, and love in these short phrases. And so I was incredibly surprised that it works so well. Of to do these things. Years later, I came across one of the many books by the Indian sage Sri Aurobindo, and I think he's like a great writer and then an awful writer, and it could be in the same book. But that's just my opinion. People are going to get pissed off. But anyways, one of his better books, in my estimation, is The Future Poetry, and because he was quite a student of poetry, especially when he was a student in Europe and was fluent in several languages. And the gist of the future poetry by Aurobindo was basically his thesis is you don't just have mantras or mantric level language in Sanskrit. You can find it all over the place. You can even find it in the modern languages, like English and French. And then he'd pick out bits of Shakespeare and pick out bits of French poets and saying this one right here is a mantra or mantra level language. And so his thesis was that poets, if they kept refining their art, eventually would be moving themselves into the same space of consciousness as rishis. Uh, and he said like the greatest poets are rishis. That was a pretty bold thing for an Indian fellow to say, and, spiritual teacher, especially not to be a Sanskrit chauvinist. So I appreciated that thesis, but I think he was right. I think even there's like bits of Bob Dylan, that are getting close to sort of mantric level power. Some of those bits. Anyways, so I think those ascension techniques that are these. I won't like reveal them in the interview because I think it's good to actually learn them. From somebody who's been doing them for a while and is a teacher of them. But they're just short, simple, stupid, but somehow strangely brilliant mantras. Yeah, just in English or Spanish or French or whatever one's primary language happens to be. Uh, I don't think there's in spirituality there's like a one size fits all sort of meditation technique out there for people. I mean, I think that probably it's good to experiment. I didn't have an elegant way, except maybe asking Babaji, but for that, experimenting and doing things for deeply, but for a while to see if they're having a good effect, and then maybe moving on to something else. And I also think that different techniques, one need not do one technique for 60 years or whatever. That oftentimes other things become more appropriate when people are going through different phases or even stages of the growth of their consciousness. So like years later, I got initiated at least into the initial level, not the third level or whatever it would be, into Kriya Yoga through the Hari Harananda lineage, who was a student of Sri Yukteswar. And it was a lovely initiation ceremony, and I was able to do all the stuff. But I think I had been ruined by the simplicity of effortless mantra practice, and so I didn't include Kriya Yoga as a main practice. Rather, I worked back into transcendental meditation as well, and into sort of the Shakta lineages of India, and doing goddess mantras, and in the same effortless way that I was taught the ascension practice, and that became a complementary practice for me. So
I think you're right that it depends on your own what you're drawn to.
yeah,
Everybody's got their kind of like soul frequency
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
And I also heard that a lot of the time the yogis would do some kind of yoga exercise just because they were meditating so long, just to move their
yes,
body so that they're not just sitting in one place all the time. And it's just a way to integrate, and move the muscles in a certain way to pull that energy in. But it makes sense as well that you would use your own language. Is it because it has a sound frequency, or does it pull the essence of the meaning behind it into your body?
I think the second one. Yeah, something of the second one. So in some of these practices, like the way they presented transcendental meditation to Westerners, starting in 1959, so was these sounds are meaningless, which is just not true. They're names of the goddess, but maybe you don't want to tell that to a concrete salesman in Los Angeles in 1960. I'm not sure if that was the reasoning or not. But yeah, and they'd say like it's better not to have meaning sometimes in the practice, which I think is sometimes true. But sometimes it's good to have the meaning as well. So I do think that that's part of it with those, with it being in the first language of a practitioner. And I will say that we did lots of hatha yoga as well, and pranayama. So that was considered to be sort of part of a whole meditative ecosystem. I mean, it became essential. Like if I skipped yoga for a day during certain periods, it would feel like I just got hit by a Mack truck. The contrast. So like we were doing 2 rounds of sun salutations, which preceded of maybe 30 minutes of asanas, and then some very simple pranayama before going into like a long couple-hour practice session of meditation. That was a regular rhythm, regular combination. So yeah,
Yeah, that's
found people that kind of came up more in a qigong tai chi tradition, and so when they would come for the retreats, wasn't pushing hatha yoga because it seemed like whatever they were doing was in a different method in a different way was getting the same job done, which is essentially to facilitate the de-stressing of the body, but then also facilitate the opening of the subtle energetic channels, and just make it in a sense almost marry the subtle to the gross in a way, and make it easier to, in a way, carry consciousness in one's body.
Just going back to the stillness that you experienced, was that stillness also carrying a certain kind of feeling with it, or was it just quiet? Just going back to the stillness that you experienced, was that stillness?
Oh, I mean, mainly just quiet. Now, I can qualify that because I think there's very subtle strata, and so maybe I'd say the subtlest strata for me was you can't put any words into here at all. We're out beyond, and it's not in a sterile way. It's not like in a we've just destroyed everything. No, there's a bizarre fullness to that absolute emptiness of in there. But on top of that, almost like the beautiful steam on the top of a lake in the morning, fog, is all these sort of like qualities of that non-quality place. The bliss, for instance, of heaviness and the heaviness, clarity. I mean, that's why I like the term Satchitananda. I mean, Satchitananda is a Sanskrit word for something that's not supposed to have any qualities, and yet in the name we're talking about qualities. Eternal bliss consciousness, where that Sat part is this kind of like I call the weighted blanket aspect, the eternal, the positive black hole aspect of experiencing the void, experiencing and the fullness of the void. The chit is like the light that's brighter than any light you can imagine. The ananda is bliss. And so yeah, these are all like qualities that we can then sort of take in as we're going into this place without quality.
I
Um,
think that's the point, is that we're here to embody that state
yeah,
and hold it, but you also can't maintain it all the time because you actually have to also be in the world at
yeah.
some
Though
point.
yeah, that's true. Though I think in a certain sense, maybe not like the most ultimate sense. I might be agree you can't maintain that all the time because maybe then you're out of a body, but a great deal of it just maintains itself at a certain point. It's like this is what witnessing consciousness is all about. And the witnessing consciousness is not supposed to be some, or pragya, it's not supposed to be some dissociative state, which a lot of people try to do, like, I'm witnessing now, I'm watching, I am behind the mind, It's this, you can be in a very sort of like dynamic activity, even brain work, like where you're having to like attend to numbers. And while all that's going on, you're also simultaneously in this big vastness in a non-confusing way. So in a certain sense, I think that's part of the mergers that nirvikalpa samadhi, comes online, or that praying without ceasing. I think praying without ceasing isn't just mumbling all the time. It's praying without ceasing is rather more understood. The experience of it is the place that prayer took me. It's there, and I can't shake it, and I can still talk and sing and dance, and that's a major marker in I think in human development is when that sort of continuity with awareness with activity starts to happen.
It's a practice, like you say, but it's hardwiring yourself to be able to connect with that state all the time until it becomes an unconscious
Yeah,
activity.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's because it's
Um,
natural. Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's because it's like it is a path of lesser resistance, and at a certain point, hell, even our ego actually kind of likes it. That's the thing. People make an enemy out of their ego or whatever. They also, my mind's bad, my ego's bad. Uh, they're very naughty. But as they start to taste that, they actually quite like it. And it's like the ego also learns how to let go into that space. So,
Yeah, the ego's got a place.
yeah,
It's when it's trying to run everything, but it doesn't have all the answers yet, that things go pear-shaped. Um, you mentioned that when you saw your mother's face in the
yeah,
mirror, that you'd kind of completed that cycle, and and before you'd had all these other achievements that kind of meant nothing. So that is actually, I think, ultimately what people are looking for. It's that connection to know we are all one, even if we supposedly separated by the veil.
yeah,
That there is that constant communion, And that is what we're all searching for. It's not the actual external accomplishments of I got this trophy or I won this
Mm.
math test, you know. And there's a quietness about it. Is that how you felt it as well? Kind of like a coming home rather than a I'm standing up above everybody.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Coming back to the original piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something you want to share with people, and it's very difficult. I get these kind of these evangelists that want to knock on your door every Sunday, telling you they found God, but I kind of understand.
I,
You've got to
I
let
totally
them be.
get.
You've got your own stuff to do.
Yeah, I was a very zealous 21-year-old meditation teacher, overzealous. I was like, we actually do have the good word. No, I don't use that language, but yeah, that was the kind of feel I really get up in people's faces. You're probably gonna die soon. Like, hey, snap, let's do it. Let's do it now. A lot. Some people appreciated that, but yeah, yeah, it's very natural. I mean, if a human being who's like not a sociopath or whatever finds bliss and finds wholeness and is experiencing it, it's a very natural sort of thing to have a urge to sort of like, hey, hey, I was fucked up too, hey, try this out, maybe it'll work. Yeah.
So a lot of people are not really on that path to be meditating like you found yourself for 6 to 12
Ah,
hours a day.
good God,
What
hear
would you
that.
recommend to people that are kind of like starting their spiritual journey and they want to get more connected? Because to me, it feels like there's an urgency. Like people need to
Yeah.
wake up kind of now and not just wait until 20 years go by and then say, okay, then I'll do it when my life calms down.
Oh, baby steps. Just do a baby step. Start immediately. Or as William James said, to change one's life, start immediately. Do it flamboyantly. It's just very, yeah, and so like I remember somebody I was in Hong Kong, and I think they were sort of like a businessman, and they were a meditation student. They were saying, Ishtar, I can't do an hour a day, and eventually they were kind of like bargaining with me. It's like, could you do 5-minute spurts 3 times a day, maybe? Could you try that out? And they're like, okay, I'll do 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, just try that out, see how that goes. And the next time I saw them, they're like, well, my 5 minute turned into 20 minute. So like, yeah, but yeah, the baby step is good. Do 2 minutes, do something like in any habit. It's not nothing, it's not, specific to meditation, right? But just pick something that's sustainable, you know.
Yeah, I guess it's finding the reward in it. As soon as you find
Yeah.
the reward in it, then your brain starts associating it, and then you find more time for it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it reminds me of the story where this young guy who came to Paramahansa Yogananda in his later life in the 40s when he had this crop of young guy students who'd read his autobiography, and he showed up and he's like, "Oh, I love you, Yogananda. I wanna do yoga here and with everybody else, but thing is, I like ladies and playing pool and smoking down at the pool hall." And Yogananda usually would like maybe turn people away, but he saw this guy's like, no, yeah, tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Like you keep doing all those things, but you come for your lessons here. But if the moment if you wake up and you have no desire to smoke, you have to promise me that you will not smoke. You'll follow that. And that was the deal. So that's in a way that was the kind of the monastic environment I came up in. Was it was more like, let's add the positive stuff and focus more on that. And as you do that, just be willing to let the other stuff fall away as it's falling away. Don't grab it. So it was not so much about denial and more about like, what are we approaching? What are we moving towards? And enjoying that. I found that, at least with my psychology, a much easier path than my previous asceticism, which was mainly about like, what can I remove here? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it also helps people connect with their feeling because
Yeah.
that's the clue. That's your guide.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know. Okay, so you're also an astrologer. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah. That's an as if it wasn't like fringe enough. I had to add like working as an astrologer to the mix. Um,
yes.
yeah, that came later. I remember even at the monastery, like one of the teachers was saying, like, Ishtar, you should be a Vedic astrologer. I had no interest to be a Vedic astrologer as a 21-year-old. I mean, even though I tried to get myself, I just didn't. But years later, after finishing, of all things, like a university degree in philosophy, I found myself living in Vancouver, BC, with my wife, and we just happened to run into this wonderful man named Rob Inglis, who was a still there, who was a tarot reader and an astrologer, and he gave classes that we took on a lark because also we liked him. We took his classes, and I took that astrology class, and I was like, whoa, I can do this fairly well, and I started doing readings for coworkers and friends, like, buy me a chai and a sandwich, and I'll, do an hour reading for you. And they went really well. And I was like, okay. Again, I was quite skeptical. I mean, astrology is like the poster child for something that, like stupid people like, from where I come from, right? Like dupes like. And there I find myself liking, like, no, I actually think there's some effect in this that goes beyond confirmation bias and the usual bugbears that you have to look for in such things. And yeah, so my wife in many ways is often quicker knowing what I'm going to be doing than myself. So even before we met Rob, she's like, I think you're going to be an astrologer. I was like, yeah, no. At that point, it's like, I don't think so. That seems remote. And there we are. Months later, I'm like, oh God, I love this stuff. I just hoovered it up with my sort of freshly minted. It's probably as good as my brain's going to be in terms of reasoning power and speed from that philosophy degree. Just dove in and hoovered it. So I've been doing that now for like 10 years, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. My perspective, like actually most other modern astrologers, we're not sort of working as fatalistic fortune tellers who look at your chart and say like, I'm sorry, you're screwed in this department. Think these mantras. Something like it's not like that at all. And it's not really fortune telling. It's for 120 years. It's been more of a psychological or soul taxonomic system. In fact, one of the early, when it shifted, one of the early convertees was Carl Jung, who was in contact with a lot of theosophists in the UK, and he got into astrology. That did help him get fired by Freud from the psychoanalytic movement because he couldn't keep his hand out of the magical thinking as a cookie jar. But then the Jungians added back into modern astrology as well, so it fed into his theories and fed back, and so yeah, we're all kind of downstream of that. And very early on, I also found that just looking at a birth chart, I wasn't expecting this because I was just learning how to analyze a chart, right? But just going through these charts, I found that I would almost every time be bombarded with imagery that didn't always track back down into my analytical reading of the chart. So that's why I started naming my sessions like intuitive astrological readings, because I would get these detailed images, and then at a certain point I was like, well, they're not paying me much, just sandwiches and chai. I'll share some of these too. And if they're rubbish, it's we're not losing out. And those became the most popular parts of the reading, and it's been like uncanny over the years. Like for instance, it's been not infrequent that an image comes and then someone says, that was a dream I had over and over as a child, like to the T. It's like, oh, that's okay. That's cool. Yeah, there's some weirdness. Like Jung was never quite sure whether astrology worked in his estimation because of its technique, or whether it like tea leaf reading or tarot or I Ching was what in his estimation like what he called like something like a synchronicity driver. I think it's a bit of both actually. But so yeah, it's been a pleasure to my focus is that I've actually done the birth chart readings for people who I consider to be very much enlightened, very whole. And so I would before them, and they gave me money. And I was like, should I give you your money back here? Because like, do you really want me to be telling you about stuff that they're like, no, this sounds like fun. It's like, okay, so we'll do it, but like, you let me know how it goes, really, because and I did it, and then they're like, oh my God, that was wonderful. And I realized at that point that, well, the way I practice, or the way many people practice actually, is it's not about fixing something that's broken. It's more like I found that the birth chart is like a mapping out of Shakti, or to translate to the audience, the mapping out of the flow of God through one's life. It's as if all of us possess within us like a certain music, or we are the music in a way. Our souls are like the music, and that to me or we're a series of dance steps. Not like tightly deterministic. Maybe it's like a multiversal possibility chart of different dance steps, but they all like descending, coming from the same, I'll say, archetypal patterns. And so basically, looking at a birth chart for me is like looking at the guiding archetypes and seeing how the different ways those would like to expand or grow like a garden, and just like taking care of a garden, different archetypes will sort of infer, like, different amounts of sunlight, different amounts of this, and to translate into a person's life, it'd be like, well, it seems like maybe, for instance, I look at a birth chart and say like, oh, this one, uh, I see like the types of spiritual path people might enjoy. So, for instance, some people have been putting themselves into like maybe deeply disembodied practices, and I see like, I think that's all wrong. It's like I think it actually you'd get more from actually just going to dancing 3 times a week than putting yourself through this. And maybe start out with something that's somatic over here, and you'll find that it's like bringing you into the stuff that this is trying to bring it. And then other people are the opposite, and it's just a wonderful way to see what's see which bits are driving which person. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that whenever they fought wars and stuff like that, they would have their own astrologer kind of
Ah,
dictating, "Oh, this is going to work," and it's been
yeah.
used for centuries. So why would it not work? But I guess it's like an orchestra almost. Like when the symphony plays the music, this is how it's going to play out. But you don't have to follow that. It's a guidance rather than a
Right.
set in stone.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's some strange markers in a chart, like for instance, like the planet Uranus in the fourth. I am I'm over 70% with those people at this point in terms I asked the question, did you leave home at 18 or before? And I get a lot of befores. So it's interesting, I don't think it's supposed to be tightly deterministic, but there are certain patterns that I've found that go. Another one is that the planet Pluto in somebody's fourth house. Now I know there's a certain amount of self-selection for my client base but so I'd have to adjust for that. But those people I find have been over 70% in helping professions, doctors, nurses, therapists, social workers. I kind of have a fairly tight group of that, so I find that very interesting, as well. There are these kind of markers for different things that tend to show up.
They'd
Uh,
also be more drawn towards astrology, I think.
Yeah, then sometimes that's just, yeah, and then there's self-selection issues I have to deal with that if I was analyzing it in more of a professional way, but I'm not. So yeah.
Well, that was so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. Where can people get hold of you, Ishtar, if they want to connect?
Yeah, okay, there's a few ways. I've got 2 websites. My meditation website is www.ascension-meditation.com. My astrological website is awakenedlightastrology.com. I have a sort of a budding Substack. Most of my content is free. So most of it is not behind a paywall. And I suppose you could just look up Ishtar Howell on Substack. I think that's my handle. And I have a YouTube channel, which is also, I think, like youtube.com/Ishtar Howell. So I use my last name. I always liked it. And so, yeah, those are the main ways. And if you go to my websites, you'll be able to email me through one of the many little contact boxes that are scattered throughout.
Perfect. I will post those details below. And then just before we go, do you have a message for our viewers?
Oh God, there's so many different messages one could have. Um, go for it. This is what I do. All the carpe diem. To me, it's like not even about like I've known a lot of people who try to like think themselves into being. I'm going to be a spiritual person, going to be on a spiritual path. That's what I should do. I think that's often like a bad idea. It's better to follow those impulses of the deep heart. Of course, that begs the question: what are those? Whatever you're doing, just do it wholeheartedly. Go for it. And often what you find is that if you do things wholeheartedly, if you carpe diem, it will evolve your habits and your desires very quickly. And one thing leads to another, and you'll find that in a year you've lived 5 years in the best possible way. And I'd say do that, uh, and also be. There's nothing like radical honesty. Of I know easier said than done, right? But there are few things as clarifying, uh, and ultimately as inspiring in terms of bringing one closer to their highest purpose, or the bliss that Joseph Campbell is about, that he's telling you to follow, than radical honesty and seizing the day. I mean, and just remember, you're not here to play it small, even if we have small lives, which I think are the beautiful lives often. Whatever, wherever we are, whatever we're looking at, no matter how beautiful or ugly the surroundings, like right now, this moment is the time to seize the day, to be whole, to embrace things exactly as they are, warts and all. So that's my message.
If you are enjoying this, please subscribe. We've got some great guests lined up for you.